deadly blizzard, a dying sheriff, and a Navy SEAL who was supposed to be on leave, until fate dragged him into a hidden war buried beneath the snow. When Evan Brooks stopped to save a stranger, he didn't know he was stepping into a trap built by a rogue soldier, and that he, his K9 shadow in a small mountain town, would become the last line between peace and catastrophe. What happened next changed everything. If you want more stories of courage, faith, and miracles in the middle of the storm, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video. Your support keeps these stories alive. Snow smothered the Wyoming highlands under a roaring white curtain that erased distance, sound, and sky in one relentless sweep of winter's fury. Evan Brooks kept both hands firm on the steering wheel of his black pickup truck as icy winds slammed against the sides, making the entire vehicle shudder every few seconds like a trembling animal. At 33, Evan carried the physical presence of a man who had spent more than a decade in the U.S. Navy, molded by discipline, operations, and the kind of environments where hesitation cost lives. He stood 6'2" with a powerful, well-conditioned frame that filled out the layers beneath his heavy military-grade winter jacket. His shoulders were broad, his chest compact with muscle, and his movements always purposeful, never wasteful. His face bore the angular sharpness of a soldier who had faced more danger than rest. Clean-shaven jawline, firm mouth, and deep-set eyes of steel blue that constantly scanned the environment, even on a road he believed to be empty. His skin carried the pale undertone of a man accustomed to extreme conditions, with faint weather lines carved around his brow and between his eyes, reminders of desert heat, freezing nights, and too many missions that blurred into a single unending memory. His dark brown hair, trimmed regulation short, remained hidden beneath a thick beanie, though a few strands peeked along his forehead, dampened by the melting frost inside the cab. But it wasn't the storm eating at him. It was the silence, too quiet, too absolute. Danger often hid inside the absence of sound, not the presence of it. Shadow, the 8-year-old military dog riding in the back seat, sensed it as well. Trained K9s rarely showed nervousness, and Shadow, who had spent 6 years in active deployment, was far beyond ordinary fear. He was a powerful Belgian Malinois, dark sable-colored with a muscular, defined build beneath his thick winter vest. His eyes, an intelligent amber, flicked constantly between the windows as his ears twitched at every shift in the wind. The dog sat steady, unmoving, yet every muscle remained coiled, ready to spring. Shadow had endured explosions, covert extraction missions, and urban combat zones where smoke never cleared. The storm didn't intimidate him, but it made him listen harder. Evan caught the movement in the rearview mirror, the way Shadow lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring. "You feel that too?" Evan murmured, his voice low, controlled, shaped by years of command and calm under fire. Shadow didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply stared forward, confirming what Evan already suspected. Something wasn't right on this road. The jagged pine silhouettes blurred behind the storm's curtain as the truck crawled along the icy asphalt. Evan was returning home on a rare leave, though the concept of rest had grown foreign to him. Months ago, during a covert maritime operation in the Pacific, an explosion had taken 2 of his teammates, men he trusted like brothers. Evan survived because Shadow dragged him out of a collapsing structure seconds before it went under. The guilt hadn't faded since. The military called it survivor's responsibility. Evan called it unfinished debt. The storm intensified, ripping snow sideways across the mountains and reducing visibility to barely 10 feet. Evan leaned forward, narrowing his gaze, scanning the blurred white. That was when he saw it, a distorted reflection of metal, half buried under a drift near a steep curve. At first it appeared like debris left behind from someone's careless skid. But then the headlights caught the unmistakable shape of a police SUV lying on its side near the edge of a ravine. Damn! Evan braked hard, the truck fishtailing before gripping the packed snow. Shadow immediately stood, nails clicking on the mat. No flares, no tracks, no movement. A crash this recent should have shown signs of struggle, rescue, or at least scattered equipment. Evan grabbed his heavy gloves, threw open the door, and stepped into the raging cold. The wind slapped him like an open hand, forcing him to tighten his jaw. Shadow jumped out behind him with a low, controlled growl forming in his throat. Not aggression, but alertness. Evan approached the wreck quickly but cautiously, assessing angles, shattered glass patterns, and the depth of the slide. The vehicle hadn't simply skidded, it had been pushed or struck deliberately. He muttered under his breath, "Someone wanted this off the road." The SUV's lights flickered weakly, casting broken beams across the snow. Evan crouched and peered through the cracked passenger window. A man was inside. Deputy Mark Hale looked to be around 38 or 40, a broad-chested, ruggedly built officer with the kind of frame that suggested a lifetime of outdoor work. His face was rough and square-jawed, with a thick, dark beard frosted over with snow. His short brown hair clung to his forehead, matted with blood from a gash near his temple. His tan skin had gone dangerously pale, and his breathing was shallow, too shallow. Evan acted without hesitation. He wedged his shoulder against the warped door and shoved. The metal screamed in protest, but shifted just enough for him to reach inside. "Deputy Hale, can you hear me?" The man groaned faintly, eyelids fluttering. Evan slid his hands under the man's arms and carefully extracted him from the wreck. Shadow circled them, watching the tree line. Every instinct awakened. Evan lowered Mark onto the snow, checking for fractures, pulse irregularities, and signs of internal bleeding. His medical field training kicked in, precise and methodical. Mark's lips moved weakly. Evan leaned closer. "Truck." "Not an accident," Mark whispered, the words broken by pain. "Weapons. Operation." "Frost Valley." Evan's entire body tensed. Frost Valley was the nearest town, a tiny community that barely appeared on maps. What kind of weapons operation could exist up here? But Mark wasn't finished. "Someone sabotaged the road. They're moving things tonight." His voice faded again. Evan stabilized the bleeding with pressure and wrapped Mark's head with gauze from his tactical med pouch. He ran a quick check of the deputy's limbs, one broken rib, maybe more. Severe concussion. He needed help fast, but the nearest emergency station was over 30 miles away, and the storm was worsening. Evan lifted Mark's limp body into his arms, the muscles in his back flexing with controlled strength. He carried him toward the truck while Shadow cleared a path, barking sharply at the blowing snow. The wind howled around them, thick with tension and something else, an unspoken warning. Someone did this deliberately, someone who might still be nearby. Evan opened the rear door and laid Mark onto the back seat as gently as possible. A faint moan escaped the injured deputy's lips. "Hang in there," Evan muttered, gripping the man's shoulder briefly before shutting the door. He turned his eyes toward the woods. The snow created shifting shadows and the storm muted every sound. But Evan felt it, eyes watching, a presence lingering. Shadow stiffened, ears forward. Evan whispered, "We're not alone, boy." Shadow released a short, low growl, not fear, recognition. Evan climbed into the driver's seat, jaw clenched. He turned the truck around carefully, beginning the slow descent toward Frost Valley. The road felt narrower now, the storm heavier, the weight of the moment settling into his chest like a stone. Why would someone attack a small-town deputy transporting weapons intel, unless that intel threatened something bigger, something hidden deep within these mountains? Mark stirred weakly behind him. You shouldn't have stopped," Evan replied without looking back. I don't leave people to die on the side of the road. That's not who I am. And it wasn't. Not after what happened to his team. Not after the nights he spent replaying the explosion in his head, telling himself he could have done more. Maybe this was the universe giving him a chance to pay back the lives he couldn't save. The truck continued toward Frost Valley, the storm swallowing their tracks behind them. Evan's hands tightened on the wheel. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't coincidence. Something was happening here, something dangerous, and he had just stepped directly into it. But turning back wasn't an option. As the storm raged outside the windshield, Evan glanced at Shadow. The dog's gaze was firm, determined, unwavering. "Looks like our leave just got canceled," Evan whispered. The dog's tail thumped once against the seat. Evan faced the road again. "Frost Valley," he muttered. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding." Behind him, Deputy Mark Hale exhaled a shallow, ragged breath. The faintest whisper escaped his lips, one Evan barely heard over the storm. "They'll come. They'll come for me." Evan's eyes hardened. "Not while I'm breathing." The truck moved deeper into the storm, carrying 3 lives and the first thread of a conspiracy waiting to unravel. Snow hammered the roofs of Frost Valley like the sky was trying to crush the town under its weight. The narrow streets were nearly invisible beneath the storm's thick white veil, and the only lights that remained alive in the night came from the small medical station on Ridgeview Street. A lonely concrete building standing against the elements as if stubbornness alone kept it anchored to the earth. Evan Brooks pushed open the station door with his shoulder while carrying the half-conscious Deputy Mark Hale, and Shadow stayed glued to his side, snow frosting the Malinois' dark coat. The warmth inside the station hit Evan's face with an almost painful contrast. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant, old wood, and hot metal from a rattling heater in the corner. Behind the front counter stood a woman, Emily Hale. She looked up sharply the moment the door slammed from the wind. Emily was in her late 20s, tall and slender, with pale skin that carried a natural flush from working long hours in cold weather. Her hair was a warm chestnut brown tied in a loose bun that had partly fallen apart, strands clinging to her cheeks. Her hazel eyes widened in shock the instant she saw her brother dangling limply in Evan's arms. The intensity of the worry that crossed her face revealed everything. Emily Hale was strong, but family was her weakness. "Mark!" she gasped, rushing forward with a speed born of instinct rather than training. Her hands were steady despite the tremor that ran beneath her voice. She wore dark scrubs beneath a gray cardigan, and though her frame was slim, there was strength in the way she gripped her brother's jacket, trying to help Evan lower him onto a rolling bed. "He's alive," Evan said as he adjusted Mark's weight. His tone was controlled and clipped, but his eyes carried softened edges. He understood fear like this. He had felt it enough times watching his teammates bleed out in sand or snow. But he needs attention now. Emily nodded quickly. She immediately assessed Mark's breathing, pupils, temperature. Her movements were fast but disciplined. The movements of someone who handled emergencies often, even when she wished she didn't have to. "What happened?" she asked, grabbing gauze, scissors, and a stethoscope from a tray. "Car was flipped on the ridge," Evan replied. "He was inside, bleeding, barely conscious, no flares, no call." Emily inhaled sharply at that. "Mark always calls in. He wouldn't ignore protocol unless he never had the chance." She swallowed, a tightness forming in her voice. It wasn't the fear of the storm or the blood. It was the knowledge that something deliberate had happened. Something aimed at her brother. Shadow positioned himself beside the door, posture alert, amber eyes tracking every corner of the room. Evan watched the dog for a moment. If Shadow felt something off, he would react first. Evan trusted that more than any alarm system. Emily cleaned Mark's wound with gentle but firm motions. "He's lucky you found him," she murmured. He wouldn't have made it in that snow. Evan didn't respond. Luck had nothing to do with why he stopped, but explaining that meant explaining shadows of the past he kept locked tight. Mark stirred faintly. A soft groan escaped his throat. Emily leaned closer, brushing a strand of his frost-stiffened hair away from his face. Mark. Hey, I'm right here. You're safe. You're in the station, okay? Can you hear me? Mark blinked weakly, his eyes unfocused at first, then slowly sharpening. He recognized the shape standing over him. Emily, he whispered. A hint of relief softened Emily's tension, but it vanished when Mark continued. They're coming. His voice cracked. They know. I survived. Evan stepped closer. Who's coming? Mark's breath hitched before he forced out one name, barely audible. Reed. Maddox. Emily froze as if the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Evan's jaw tightened, the name unfamiliar but heavy enough to demand attention. Who is he? Emily swallowed hard. A ghost, or at least he was supposed to be. Then with a shaky breath she explained. Reed Maddox had been a soldier once, special forces. A man praised for his sharp mind, brutal efficiency, and uncanny ability to predict enemy movement. But he was also a man with something broken in his foundation. He had disappeared after an unauthorized mission overseas 6 years ago. Rumors said he fell in with private contractors. Some said he went completely rogue. Others claimed he had died. Emily's lips pressed tight. Mark mentioned him once. Said Maddox was connected to something happening in these mountains. Something big. Evan absorbed the information silently. Rogue soldiers were dangerous not because they lacked training, but because they lacked rules. As Emily continued tending to Mark's wound, Evan paced the room slowly, letting his instincts work. The station was small, just 3 rooms and a hallway leading to a storage closet. One exit, cold windows, too many blind angles. If someone wanted Mark dead, and based on what he'd muttered they did, then the station was a trap waiting to close. Shadow lifted his head suddenly, ears twitching sharply. Evan stopped mid-step. What is it? The dog didn't bark or growl. Instead, he stared at the window, still and rigid. Evan's stomach tightened. Shadow only froze like that when he sensed something approaching silently. Evan crossed to the window, sweeping the frost with his gloved hand. Outside, the blizzard smothered everything, but he noticed something. Shadows moving against the wind instead of with it. Emily, Evan said quietly, turn off the lights. Her head jerked up. What? Why? Someone's out there. The conviction in his tone stripped away any need for further explanation. Emily immediately killed the overhead lights. The station fell into a dim glow, lit only by the faint ambient streetlight leaking through swirling snow. Evan moved past Shadow and pressed himself to the wall beside the window. He listened, not to the storm, but to the breaks in it. Silence was sharper than noise. Shadow's growl was nearly soundless, a vibration more than a voice. Emily's breath became shaky as she guided the bed into the corner, using herself as a shield between Mark and the door. Evan pulled a small pistol from inside his jacket, a compact matte black sidearm he carried off duty because danger never respected schedules. Evan, Emily whispered, fear threading through the word. Evan didn't look back. Stay low. Stay with your brother. Don't move unless I tell you. A sharp crack shattered the window before she could answer. Glass exploded inward in a glittering spray. Emily screamed, ducking instinctively as Shadow lunged forward with a vicious snarl. Evan tackled Emily down just as a second shot tore through the metal counter. They're inside, she cried. Footsteps thudded heavily against the tile. The attackers moved fast, coordinated. 3 of them, judging by the pattern of steps and how they covered angles. All wearing dark winter tactical gear. Masks, no emblems. Professionals. One attacker swept toward them with a suppressed rifle. Evan surged upward, slamming his shoulder into the man's torso. The gun discharged into the wall as the attacker grunted from the impact. Evan twisted, using the man's momentum against him, and drove him into the floor. The attacker scrambled back, but Shadow was already there, teeth bared, pinning the man's forearm with a ferocity that snapped bone. A strangled scream erupted. Evan grabbed the man's rifle and swung it toward the doorway. Another figure burst through, weapon raised. Evan fired once, hitting the shoulder of the second attacker. The man stumbled backward, slamming against a cabinet and knocking medical supplies everywhere. Emily shielded Mark with her body. Evan shouted, "Stay down!" The third attacker kicked the door of the supply room open, using it as partial cover. He fired rapidly toward Evan, bullets striking the reception desk and shattering the computer monitor. Evan ducked behind an overturned table, snowflakes drifting in through the broken window and settling on the blood-spattered floor. "Emily," Evan said, voice steady despite the chaos. "Get Mark behind the treatment room door." She nodded, trembling but determined, and pulled her brother inch by inch while keeping her body between him and the shooters. Shadow released the first attacker and sprinted to Evan, positioning himself at Evan's left flank, ready to charge again. Evan peeked over the table, calculated the shooter's angle, then shifted low and fast along the floor. The attacker didn't see him move until Evan was already beside him. Evan hooked his arm around the man's wrist, wrenching the gun away. The attacker swung a fist toward Evan's jaw. Evan blocked with his forearm and countered with an elbow to the throat. The man collapsed. Silence fell. It wasn't peaceful, just the absence of bullets. Emily's breath came shaky but relieved. Shadow sniffed the second attacker, ensuring he stayed down. Evan scanned the room, checking corners, ensuring none of them were pretending. They weren't. "Is it over?" Emily whispered. "For now," Evan replied. "But they'll be back. They knew exactly where to find your brother." Emily's eyes glistened with fear, but beneath that, anger sparked. "Because of Maddox," she said. Evan looked at her with quiet certainty. "No, because Mark was investigating something Maddox doesn't want anyone to know." Evan holstered the pistol. His voice grew lower, more focused. "And now that I've helped him, I'm part of it too." Emily swallowed, understanding the weight of his words. Outside, the storm roared louder, as if the night itself braced for what was coming next. The storm had quieted by dawn, leaving Frost Valley wrapped in a heavy white stillness that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Evan Brooks stood outside the medical station, the sky a muted gray above him, the cold sharp enough to bite through his sleeves. Shadow sat beside him, the Malinois' breath forming thin clouds as he watched the empty street with alert, disciplined eyes. Behind them, through the window, Emily Hale gathered her supplies into a thick canvas medical bag. Inside, Mark Hale slept again, sedation pulling him back under before his pain could drag him awake. Emily had checked his vitals 3 times, adjusted his bandages, and made sure the locked storage room door held firm. Evan had insisted they move Mark to that room. It was the safest place in the small clinic. But Emily wasn't staying behind. She hadn't argued. She had simply stood still for a long moment beside her brother, then lifted her chin and said, "If Reed Maddox targeted Mark, then I need to help stop whatever he's trying to do. I'm not hiding while my brother is hunted." Her voice hadn't shaken. That alone had convinced Evan she meant every word. Now Emily emerged from the clinic and locked the door behind her, her cheeks flushed from determination and cold. She wore a dark, insulated jacket over her scrubs, thick boots, and gloves too big for her small hands. Her chestnut hair was tied in a tighter bun this time, though strands still escaped along her temples. Her hazel eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but fire glimmered beneath it, a protective fire sharpened overnight. Evan studied her for a moment. You sure about this? Yes, Emily said. You'll need someone who knows the terrain, and Mark. Her voice caught just briefly. I won't lose him, she finished. Evan nodded. He understood that kind of resolve, love sharpened into armor. Shadow nudged Emily's leg gently, sensing her fear. She reached down to stroke his head, her fingers trembling slightly but steadying as they slid along his warm fur. Let's move, Evan said. They left Frost Valley behind in his pickup truck, climbing into the mountains toward Sierra Ridge. The road narrowed as they rose higher. Snowdrifts lined the edges like frozen walls, and jagged pine trees towered on either side, their branches drooping under fresh weight. The storm had scrubbed away tracks, but Evan relied on memory and Mark's broken directions from the night before. Emily held onto the door handle, gripping it harder every time the truck bounced against uneven patches of ice. I haven't been up here in years, she admitted quietly. Sierra Ridge shut down when I was a kid. They said the tunnels were unstable. I had a friend whose father worked there. He said the place felt wrong even then. Wrong how? Evan asked without taking his eyes off the road. Emily shrugged. He said the air felt like it watched you back. She tried to smile. Kids exaggerate, but seeing what Mark stumbled into now, I'm not laughing about it anymore. Shadow pressed his nose to the window, fogging the glass. The dog's ears were pricked forward, muscles tight. He remembered last night's gunfire as clearly as Evan did. Sierra Ridge appeared as they rounded a bend, a cluster of skeletal metal frames, rusted support arches, and half-collapsed buildings swallowed by snow. Even untouched, the place would have looked dead. But something about the hollow structures felt too still, too quiet. Evan stopped the truck about 60 yards from the largest structure, the main shaft entrance. We go on foot from here. Emily adjusted her gloves, tried to hide her shiver. Lead the way. They approached slowly. Shadow walked ahead, nose low, body low, like a living radar system sweeping the ground. His paws sank into the thick snow without a sound. Evan spotted the first clue immediately. Boot prints. Barely visible now, softened by wind, but deep enough to confirm someone had been here since the storm ended. Someone heavy, carrying gear. He gestured to Emily. She leaned closer, brows furrowing. This isn't old. Someone came through this morning. Shadow stopped suddenly. His tail froze. His ears pivoted sharply left. Evan moved to stand beside him, lowering into a cautious crouch. That was when he saw it. A small metallic glint beneath a seemingly untouched mound of powder, just an inch of exposed casing. Evan raised his hand instantly. Don't move. Emily stiffened, breath halting. What is it? Pressure mine, Evan said. Whoever set this knows how to hide them. Emily's face paled. Is this Maddox? His style? Yes. Shadow circled the mine carefully, then looked back at Evan, waiting for his next move. Stay behind me, Evan said as he steered them around the perimeter. The deeper they went into Sierra Ridge, the more signs appeared. Tripwires, motion sensors masked as icicles, thermal triggers disguised beneath snow. Reed Maddox built himself a fortress, Evan muttered, which means whatever he's hiding is worth killing for. Emily swallowed hard, and Mark got too close. Evan didn't confirm it aloud, but the answer lived in his jawline, tight, angry, controlled. They reached the entrance of the main shaft where the mine plunged into darkness. A thick chain hung across the opening, but fresh frost patterns revealed it had been moved recently. Shadow suddenly tensed and let out a low, rumbling growl. What is it, boy? Evan whispered. Shadow's head snapped toward the right side of the entrance, toward a slope covered in fresh snow. He walked toward it with precision, sniffing slowly. Then his paw scratched lightly at the ground. Evan knelt beside him and brushed away the top layer of snow. A vent, a narrow man-made vent angled downward. "This wasn't part of the original mine," Evan whispered. "Someone dug this, recently." Emily leaned in, eyes widening. "A hidden access tunnel? Or an emergency escape," Evan said. "Either way, it means Maddox is deeper inside than we thought." Shadow nudged the vent, then looked up at Evan with a distinct, urgent stare. "He wants us to follow," Emily said softly. "And we will," Evan replied. He cleared more snow until the vent widened into a crawl space barely big enough for one person at a time. Evan went first, Shadow behind him, Emily last. The tunnel descended sharply, forcing them into a crouched shuffle. The air grew colder, wetter, tinged with a metallic scent that stuck to the tongue. The passage opened into a cavern inside the mine. It was massive. Rusted rail tracks ran along the floor, old mining carts overturned and frozen in place, and ancient support beams groaned under decades of weight. But none of that mattered as much as what stood in the center. A table. On it, a set of maps, laptops, cases, stacked crates marked with military symbols that no civilian should possess. Emily whispered, "What? What is all this?" But Evan didn't answer because Shadow froze. His entire body went rigid. A heartbeat later, Evan heard it too. Footsteps, one set, fast, close. "Emily, down!" Evan shouted. A figure burst from behind the support beam to their left, tackling Evan with violent force. The man was tall, nearly Evan's height, with a lean, hardened frame built from training rather than vanity. His face was partially hidden beneath a black scarf, but his eyes were sharp, cold, and focused. Evan recognized the look immediately. The look of a professional who killed because it was efficient. The attacker swung a knife downward. Evan rolled, barely dodging it. The blade sliced through his sleeve. He felt the sting but ignored it. Pain was a distant concept now. The attacker lunged again. This time Shadow launched like a missile, slamming into the man's side. They tumbled across the dirt, but the attacker recovered too quickly. He kicked Shadow hard in the ribs, sending the dog skidding. "Shadow!" Emily cried. The man pivoted toward her, and that was his mistake. Evan grabbed a fallen metal rod and swung it in a clean arc, striking the attacker's wrist. The knife clattered across the floor. The man countered with a punch, grazing Evan's jaw, but Evan moved faster now, fueled by adrenaline and purpose. He caught the man's arm, twisted, and used his weight to slam him onto the ground. The man tried to rise. Shadow seized his arm and yanked him back down, holding him in place. Evan pinned him with a knee and ripped the scarf from his face. The attacker was young, mid-30s, with sandy brown hair shaved close, a scar running from his eyebrow to his cheek, and pale skin weathered by exposure. His jaw was square and stubbled, lips tight with defiance. His eyes carried no regret, only mission-focused determination. Emily stepped closer, trembling but resolute. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer at first. Evan tightened his grip. Finally, the attacker spit out 2 words. "You're too late," Evan growled. "For what?" The man smirked, blood pooling at the corner of his mouth. "The shipment leaves tonight." "Shipment of what?" Emily demanded. But the attacker's gaze flicked to the crates. Evan's stomach dropped. Shadow growled, hackles rising. The crates were marked with hazardous material symbols, biological hazard warnings. Emily covered her mouth. Oh my God. Before Evan could press further, the attacker slipped his hand into his vest. A detonator. "No!" Evan shouted. But Shadow acted faster, clamping onto the man's wrist and jerking it aside just as the man hit the trigger. The explosion misfired. Only one of the smaller charges detonated, blowing a hole into the far wall instead of the entire chamber. Enough to stun the attacker. Enough to save them. Evan knocked the detonator away and secured the man with cable ties. Emily rushed to Shadow, checking his side. "He's okay, just bruised." Shadow licked her hand, reassuring her. Evan turned to the scattered papers on the table. He sifted through them quickly, scanning coordinates, coded messages, transport routes. One file, stamped with a red insignia, caught his eye. It detailed a biological weapon shipment. Destination unknown. Departure tonight. He felt Emily step beside him. Evan. This is real, isn't it? Maddox is planning something catastrophic. Evan folded the document with grim certainty. And we're the only ones who know exactly where he hid the evidence. Emily's eyes widened with fear, but also resolve. What do we do now? She asked. Evan looked toward the exit, jaw tightening. Now, he said, we stop him before he starts a war. Shadow stood beside him, tail low, body steady, ready for whatever came next. The storm outside howled again, as if warning them what waited beyond the mine. Their fight had only begun. The blizzard rolled over Sierra Ridge with a fury that seemed almost deliberate, a sky-born assault that swallowed the mountains beneath an ocean of white. The wind shrieked through the dead pines like something alive, something angry. Evan Brooks stood at the edge of the frozen overlook, the swirling snow stinging his face despite the visor pulled low over his eyes. Shadow stood beside him, rigid, dark coat battered by the storm, amber eyes slicing through the blinding white with predatory focus. The storm felt alive, and Evan felt the familiar weight in his chest. The calm before something violent, the same feeling he'd known right before breaches in abandoned cities overseas and raids on river factories where silence had meant death. His phone buzzed once inside his tactical jacket. The encrypted line clicked open. A voice, low and steady, responded immediately on the other end. Brooks, we're in position. It was Special Agent Cole Bennett, Federal Tactical Liaison, a man Evan had served with during a joint operation in Turkey years before. Bennett was in his early 40s, tall and solid, with the posture of someone who had seen enough war to hate it but enough danger to respect it. He had tightly cropped blonde hair and a square jaw shadowed with dark stubble. His deep-set green eyes always carried a wary look, as if expecting betrayal from any corner. Bennett's personality was sharp, practical, unbending, shaped by a botched mission early in his career when a partner failed to follow orders and civilians died. Since then, Bennett followed regulations with almost religious fervor, but he trusted Evan because Evan never broke under pressure. Evan replied, "Copy. Move to West Access Point. I'll breach via ventilation shaft. Maddox won't expect above-ground entry." Bennett grunted approval. "You sure you're good climbing that in this weather?" Evan glanced at the jagged slope behind him, nearly invisible under the storm's weight. "I've climbed worse." He hung up. The wind howled harder, as if resenting the interruption. Evan turned to Shadow. "We finish this tonight." Shadow's ears perked, and the dog pressed closer. Ready. Evan moved quickly, scaling the steep ridge with controlled, silent movements. Every muscle responded like a machine tuned from years of discipline. The snow beneath his boots groaned but held. The shaft was hidden beneath a sunken plate and layers of frost. Evan unclipped the panel, lifted it, and lowered himself into darkness. Shadow leaped in silently behind him. The shaft smelled of rust and old metal. Evan crawled forward, pushing through the narrow space until the shaft widened over the central mining hall. He paused, muscles still. Through the grate below he saw them, a half-dozen armed mercenaries patrolling the floor. Their postures were tense, movements sharp. They weren't hired thugs. These men moved like soldiers, trained, efficient, dangerous. Over the intercom, a distorted voice barked orders. "Load everything into the flatbed. Maddox wants the convoy ready the moment weather breaks. No mistakes." "Read Maddox." Evan felt his pulse steady, not race. True danger didn't make him panic. It sharpened him. He scanned for Maddox himself, the ghost with a soldier's mind and a criminal's intent. He wasn't on the main floor. That meant he was preparing to flee. That meant time was short. Evan lowered the grate silently and dropped down behind a stack of rusted crates. Shadow landed beside him without sound. A mercenary passed near their hiding place. Evan's hand shot out, dragging the man behind the crates. A muffled struggle, then silence. Evan pressed forward. Bennett and the federal team breached at the far end of the hall. Shots erupted instantly. The mercenaries reacted with coordinated precision. Bullets clattered off metal. The mine became a cage of sound and chaos. Evan moved along the side wall, a ghost among shadows. He fired a controlled burst at two mercenaries taking cover behind a conveyor belt. Both dropped. Shadow sprinted forward, tackling another man from behind, jaws clamping onto the attacker's forearm through fabric, dragging him down with brutal efficiency. "Clear the main hall," Bennett shouted through the comm, his voice strained but forceful. "Aye, Brooks, find Maddox," Evan responded with a single word, "Copy," before sprinting toward the access tunnel at the rear. The tunnel sloped downward into darkness, lit only by flickering emergency lamps. The air felt colder here. Wrong, like something poisonous moved silently through it. Evan's breath formed white clouds in the beam of his flashlight. Shadow stayed close, his paws silent against the frozen metal grates. They pushed deeper until footsteps echoed ahead, fast, purposeful. Evan slowed, aiming his weapon forward. A figure stepped into the dim light. Not Maddox, a guard, younger, maybe mid-20s. His dark hair hung in wet clumps from the sweat and snow. Fear flickered in his brown eyes when he saw Evan. "Please, don't," he began. Evan fired one warning shot into the wall beside the man's head. The guard dropped his rifle instantly. Evan grabbed the front of the man's jacket, pulling him close. "Where's Maddox?" The guard trembled. "He's going to the lower shaft. There's a tunnel. An old escape route from when the mine was active. He has a truck waiting at the bottom, armed." Evan released him. "Lie down. Don't move." The guard obeyed instantly. Evan sprinted down the tunnel with Shadow beside him. The slope steepened, the walls widened. They emerged at the threshold of a massive underground chamber. And there he was. Reed Maddox. Maddox stood near a steel gate that opened into an old mining elevator. He was tall, taller than Evan, with a physique built not from gyms but from survival. His black winter coat clung to his broad shoulders. Snow clung to his beard, trimmed short but uneven, giving him a rugged edge. His hair was cut close to the scalp, streaked with gray, not from age but from stress and years of running. His eyes were the most striking. Icy blue, cold, sharp, unreadable. Eyes of a man who once believed in something but had lost it long ago. In his right hand was a compact SMG. In his left, a metal case marked with a biohazard symbol. Evan's stomach tightened. "Freeze, Maddox." Maddox turned slowly, his face unreadable. Then a faint smile curved his lips. "I wondered which of them would make it down here first. I'm almost disappointed it's you, Brooks." Evan lowered himself into a ready stance. "Drop the weapon." "You won't shoot me," Maddox replied calmly. "You still think like a soldier." His smile widened slightly. "I don't." Evan stepped closer, slow, deliberate. Shadow growled, teeth bared, hackles raised. Maddox lifted the metal case. "This shipment goes global in 48 hours. This town is nothing. The world isn't yours to destroy," Evan cut in. Maddox recognized the conviction in Evan's voice. Something in his expression darkened. "You're already too late," he fired. Evan lunged sideways behind a support pillar. Bullets screamed through the cold air. Shadow sprinted across the chamber, dodging gunfire with predatory speed. Maddox shifted his aim toward the dog. Evan fired 2 fast shots, forcing Maddox behind a generator. The metal case fell to the floor with a heavy clang. Maddox snarled, "You don't understand what these weapons can do." Evan moved from pillar to pillar, closing the distance. I understand enough. You can't stop progress. This isn't progress, Evan said, voice low. It's a grave. Maddox charged from cover, firing wildly. Evan tackled him, both crashing against the generator with a metallic roar. The SMG skidded across the floor. Maddox swung a hard punch into Evan's jaw. Evan absorbed the impact, countering with a knee to Maddox's ribs. Maddox elbowed Evan's shoulder, pain shooting down Evan's arm. The man was strong, stronger than expected. But Evan wasn't fueled by ego. He was fueled by purpose. Maddox lunged for the case. Shadow intercepted him, slamming into Maddox's back with brutal force. Maddox fell face first onto the steel floor. Evan seized the moment, grabbing Maddox's arm and twisting until the bone nearly snapped. Maddox cried out, struggling violently. Evan pinned him with solid weight, forearm pressing against Maddox's throat. Maddox choked out, "You think stopping me changes anything?" Evan pressed harder. "It changes tonight." Maddox's resistance faded. His arms dropped. He stopped fighting. Evan secured him with zip cuffs and retrieved the metal case. It was intact, heavy, and deadly. Bennett's voice crackled through the comm. "Brooks, status?" Evan exhaled. "Maddox is down. Case secured." Bennett responded with clear relief. "Copy. Extraction incoming." Evan stood, lifting the case carefully. Maddox glared up at him from the floor, defeated but not broken. "They'll come looking for what I built," he said with cold, quiet certainty. Evan met his gaze with equal steel. "And we'll be there waiting." Shadow nudged Evan's leg, tail low, sensing the danger had passed, for now. Evan looked around the chamber. Mercenaries subdued, weapons seized, victims freed. The storm still howled outside, but inside the mine silence returned, heavy, exhausted, victorious. As he walked Maddox out through the snow-lashed shaft, Evan felt something settle inside him, a weight lifting. Not completely, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to believe that some battles mattered more than the scars they left. Enough to believe he was still on the right side of the line. Morning unfolded slowly over Frost Valley, as though the rising sun itself approached with caution, uncertain if it had permission to pierce through the remnants of the brutal storm. The sky carried a pale gold glow, diffusing through thin clouds and drifting steam rising from the snow-capped roofs of the small mountain town. The storm had passed, the violence had ended. But the memory of what had happened lingered like footprints not yet erased by fresh snowfall. Evan Brooks stepped out of the federal command tent set up near the outskirts of the mine site, inhaling the sharp, clean scent of winter air now free of smoke, danger, and gunpowder. His breath curled in the cold, drifting upward. He rolled his shoulders once, slowly feeling the ache of combat begin to settle deep within the muscles. Bruises throbbed beneath his jacket, ribs sore from the fight with Maddox, knuckles scraped from the rough metal floor. Shadow trotted beside him, tail low but relaxed, the Malinois' coat glinting dark bronze under the soft light. The dog's amber eyes looked brighter today, alert but calm, the posture of a warrior who knew the battle was done. Evan kneeling next to him and gave the dog's head a firm, grateful rub. "Good work, Shadow. Couldn't have done it without you." Shadow leaned into the touch, his breath steady, proud. A voice called from behind Evan. "That's one hell of an understatement." Evan stood and turned to see Special Agent Cole Bennett approaching. Bennett looked exhausted, his heavy tactical jacket dusted white, his blonde hair damp near the temples, dark circles under his eyes. But beneath the fatigue was something rare for him, a faint, approving smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Bennett extended a hand. "You saved a lot of people tonight, Brooks." Evan took the handshake. "We saved them." Bennett shook his head slightly. "Don't do that." His voice carried quiet sincerity. Your instincts, your speed, your decisions, they turned this entire operation around. My team followed your lead more than mine. Evan didn't argue, but he didn't bask in the praise either. Pride wasn't why he fought. Bennett continued. The brass wants to put in a commendation for you. And, he lowered his voice slightly, they're authorizing extended leave. Real leave, not the kind they cut short like usual. Evan blinked, startled for the first time. Extended? At least 3 months, Bennett confirmed. They think you earned it. He paused, giving Evan a knowing look. They're right, Evan exhaled slowly. 3 months. It felt strange, too generous, too still, too quiet. What about Maddox? He asked. Bennett sighed. Alive, in custody, and angry as hell. Figures. We're transferring him out by helicopter the second winds settle. The lab teams are already securing the weapons case. The biological material is contained. He hesitated, then added, It's over, Brooks. Evan nodded slowly. The words settled into him like warmth gradually spreading into cold limbs. It was over. Truly over. For the first time in a long time, he believed it. He headed down the snowy path leading toward Frost Valley's small medical station. Shadow walking gently at his side, fatigued but still vigilant. The town was waking up slowly. Lights flickered in houses. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few townsfolk peeked out their doors, cautious, confused but safe. Word of the operation had already begun to circulate. A few people offered Evan small nods, some hesitant, others grateful but overwhelmed. Evan acknowledged each with quiet respect. He'd never been good at receiving thanks, but he understood its weight. When he reached the medical station, the building felt different from before. For the first time, it seemed peaceful, warm, human. Emily Hale stepped out from the doorway just as Evan arrived. Emily looked calmer now, though her exhaustion was clear. She wore a soft cream sweater over scrubs, and her chestnut brown hair hung slightly looser around her shoulders than before. Her pale skin, once strained with fear, now carried warmth and color. Her hazel eyes brightened the moment they landed on Evan and on Shadow. "You're back," she said, releasing a breath she'd been holding for hours. Evan nodded. "Everything's secure. Maddox is in custody." Emily's shoulders sagged with relief, genuine and deep. "Thank God," she whispered. She stepped aside to let Evan in. Mark Hale was propped up on a medical bed, a blanket over his legs, stitches clean and neat along his temple. Though pale, he looked much better than before. His square jaw was still rough with dark stubble, his solid build now less tense, but his eyes, steady, observant, were very much alive. Mark raised an eyebrow as Evan approached. "Well, damn," Mark said, voice hoarse but filled with humor. "Emily told me what happened. I figured you'd finish the job, but hearing it's done, it's something else." Evan cracked a faint smile. "Good to see you awake." "Good to be awake," Mark returned. Then he sobered. "And thank you for everything. For pulling me out of that wreck, for keeping Emily safe, for stopping Maddox." Evan gave a quiet nod. "Anyone else would have done the same," Mark snorted. "No, they wouldn't." The sincerity in his tone was undeniable. Emily approached Mark's bedside, resting a hand gently on his shoulder. The gesture carried affection, comfort, and gratitude rolled into something familial and grounding. Mark squeezed her hand before looking at Evan again. "Take care of yourself, Brooks. You've earned it." Evan lingered a moment longer, then nodded firmly before stepping back outside. Emily followed him. The crisp morning air bit softly at their faces. The storm clouds had begun to break apart, revealing the faint glow of a rising sun peeking behind the distant mountain ridge. Frost Valley looked transformed. Not untouched by danger, but recovering, healing. Emily folded her arms gently as she looked at Evan. Bennett told me you got extended leave. Just found out, Evan said. 3 months. That's a long time. Emily's voice held a delicate hope, as if afraid to place too much weight on the words. Evan studied her quietly. Emily Hale was strong in ways he respected deeply, not because of bravado, but because of her quiet endurance, the way she held together in fear, the way she protected her brother, the way she confronted danger despite not being trained for it. She was not a soldier, but she was steady, courageous, soft in the ways Evan feared he had forgotten how to be. A long time is good, Evan said gently. Emily smiled, a soft, real smile that brightened her entire face. Shadow nudged Emily's knee, tail giving one small wag. She reached down and scratched behind his ear. You're a hero too, Shadow. The dog closed his eyes briefly, enjoying the praise. Evan glanced toward the hill overlooking Frost Valley, its peak catching the first ray of sunlight. Want to see something? He asked. Emily tilted her head. What? Evan nodded toward the ridge. Sunrise. The storm left us a good one. Emily looked back at the medical station, ensuring Mark was stable, then wrapped her scarf a little tighter. Yes, she said softly. I'd like that. The three of them walked through the quiet morning, Evan leading, Emily beside him, Shadow trotting ahead, paws crunching over fresh snow. They climbed the gentle slope, the cold air crisp but no longer hostile. At the top, the world opened. Frost Valley stretched below like a painting, rooftops sparkling with frost, smoke curling from chimneys, the mountains rising behind like ancient protectors. The sun crested the distant ridge, painting everything in warm gold. Emily inhaled with wonder. It's beautiful, she whispered. Evan watched the horizon, the way the light pushed away the last remnants of storm shadows. Peace was rare, fragile, precious. Shadow sat beside him, leaning lightly into Evan's leg, sharing warmth. Emily moved closer, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. There was no fear now, no danger, no uncertainty, just breath, morning light, and a chance for something new. Evan felt the ache in his chest soften. For years, his life had been defined by danger, missions, loss, duty. But standing here, with Shadow at his side and Emily beside him, he understood something he had forgotten long ago. Even a soldier could have a place to return to. What now? Emily asked, her voice gentle. Evan looked at her, then at Shadow, then back to the sunrise. Now. He exhaled slowly, deeply. Now we live, one day at a time. Emily smiled. Shadow pressed closer, and the first full sunbeam warmed them all. Frost Valley was safe. Their battles were done. And in the quiet glow of morning, Evan Brooks felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder, fire, or blinding light. Sometimes they come quietly, through courage, through compassion, through the simple choice to stand up when walking away would be easier. In Evan's battle against darkness, the miracle wasn't just the survival of a town. It was the reminder that hope can rise even in the coldest storms, that faith can live even in the harshest nights, and that God often works through ordinary hands doing extraordinary things. In our daily lives, we all face storms, fear, doubt, loneliness, hardship, and yet, like Evan, like Emily, like Shadow, we continue forward. Every act of kindness is a small miracle. Every moment of courage is a silent victory. Every time we choose to protect, to love, to forgive, to help, the world becomes a little brighter. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you that miracles still exist even in the hidden corners of our days, please share it. Leave a comment about what it meant to you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope, courage, and faith. May God bless every single person watching, guide your steps through every storm you face, and fill your life with strength, peace, and unexpected miracles. Amen.